This is a very uncertain, unsettling time for us all. We are being taken out of our comfort zone. And I know how hard it is for everybody, and I just hope you're managing well. My aim this evening with you is to talk about economic management in this era of the coronavirus. And this era has two elements: the immediate crisis management stage that the world is in, and second, what comes next. So I'm going to be talking about the journey that we're in and the destination. It's relevant, what I'm saying is relevant not just to policymakers, but to companies and households. It's about the context, the environment in which we all operate. Think of a house and a neighborhood. Before you decide to live in a particular house, you have to have a view about the neighborhood. And once you live in a particular neighborhood, you go up and down with this neighborhood. So I will be talking about the environment in which Egypt and other developing countries will be operating over the next 12 to 24 months. I will not be talking about Egypt itself. I don't have better information than you other than to observe how well the infections have been contained and what an effort everybody's making. And I'm going to be realistic. This is not about being negative or positive. This is about being realistic. So let's talk about the current situation. And there are 5 things to know about this current situation. 1, this will be the worst recession for the advanced economies since the Great Depression of the 1930s. This will make the global financial crisis and the Great Recession that followed look mild. That this is a major shock to the global economy that has to be taken seriously. Let me give you some numbers. Europe, the European economy will contract in 2020 by 10 to 15%. This morning, the Bank of England made a projection of a 14% contraction in the United Kingdom. The US, the biggest economy in the world, will contract somewhere between 8 to 10%. If you're a developing country, you cannot decouple yourself from this reality. It means lower export volume. You will sell less to the rest of the world. It means lower commodity prices. You will sell at a lower price. It means lower remittances. You'll receive less money from your workers. It means lower tourism. Fewer people are going to visit. And it means lower foreign direct investment. This is not a pleasant neighborhood to be in, but unfortunately, this is the neighborhood we have. And just to show you how hard this is, some developing countries, not Egypt, I want to stress, some developing countries are already facing difficulties managing simply the spillover effect, what they have received from the rest of the world. And they have not, alhamdulillah, so far, had outbreaks, major outbreaks of the virus. In fact, one of the biggest puzzle I'm going to come back to, according to Bill Gates, is why is it we haven't seen more of the outbreak of the virus in Africa in particular? The second point about the situation is the damage is already visible. In the United States, in just 7 weeks, 33 million people have lost their jobs. So 1/3 of the population of Egypt has lost its job in the United States in just 7 weeks. That is 20% of the labor force. The highest unemployment rate that was during the Great Recession in the United States was 10%. The highest unemployment rate ever in the United States was 25%, 24.9 to be exact, during the global depression of the 1930s. we will get to 25% in the United States. I can quote you numbers from Europe. New records are being set every day, and they're not very good ones. And the social dislocation in the rich countries is stunning. I live in a relatively well-off state, California. There are long lines outside the food banks. Pictures of Spain, of long lines outside people who can no longer afford food. 1 in 4 children in the United States live now in food insecurity households. And domestic violence and mental anxiety is on the way up. Third, because of this, the response of governments has been unprecedented. There have been 3 terms that have governed the response. Whatever it takes. We will do whatever it takes to limit the damage. The second response. Whole of government. This is not up to one government agency. This is not up to one central bank. It is everybody that is in a war. And the word war is being used over and over again. A war against hunger, a war against death, and a war against economic damage. The numbers in the United States that this has involved are in the trillions. So far, $6 trillion have been thrown at this problem. 6 trillion. And it's all about relief. It's all about containing the damage. We haven't even started talking about stimulating the recovery. This is all about containing the damage. There is no doubt about willingness on the parts of governments. There is no doubt about ability, but effectiveness has not been as high as you'd want. Why? We've never seen this enemy before. We are having to build pipes to get to different segments of the population and to deal with the health crisis. The global response has been more disappointing, to be honest. There has been less policy coordination so far than during the global financial crisis, even though this is a global problem and we have a collective responsibility. And it is the non-traditional players, the African countries with Egypt involved, the G20, the UN, rather than the G7, that have taken the lead on important initiatives. The fourth point is the alphabet. What do we expect? You know, crises normally spell out ILUV. Either you go straight down, or you go straight down and you stabilize, an L, or you go straight down, you stay down a little bit, and then you go back up. Or the best crisis to have is a V. You come straight down and you go back straight up. When we initially started this crisis, the view was this is a V. Now we're somewhere in a U, but we have a new letter, a W, that we may come down, start recovering, have another infection, come down again, and start recovering. And that speaks, and that's my fifth and final point about what to know about the current situation, to 3 inherent contradictions that make this one of the most challenging time for my generation. We call it a generation-defining moment. It will define our generation, how well we do. Because if we do badly, the next generations are going to suffer tremendously. The first contradiction is the one we all feel between health and the economy, or what people call lives and livelihood. Lives, meaning social distancing, separation, so that we can make sure that we gain time. It's about gaining time. The scientists are very hard at work for remedies, both treatment and vaccine. But we need time. How do you gain time? By minimizing infection. How do you minimize infection? By separating people. That's the health requirement. But the economy is not built for separation. The economy is built for integration, for connectiveness, for interaction. And that is a basic contradiction that we need to resolve and resolve quickly. In the advanced economies, it's between lives and livelihood. In sub-Saharan Africa, a friend of Mahmoud Mohideen and myself put it to me the other day. It's about the race between dying from infection or dying from hunger. Because Zimbabwe has 3 ventilators. The whole of Nigeria, 200 million people, has 500 ventilators. So if we get this serious outbreak across sub-Saharan Africa, it will be between living because you avoided the infection, or living because you have avoided hunger. What about the longer term? The key issue, again, is to remember this is about a journey and a destination. We already know what is looking different about the destination. And especially with Minister Amr Moussa on the call, I want to say a phrase that I have been saying over and over again. Anybody in foreign policy, anybody in defense will tell you that when you are faced with a war, the challenge is not simply to win the war. The challenge is to secure the peace. You have to also win the peace. Because if you don't win the peace, you create another problem down the road. In response to the 2008 and 2009 crisis, which was also a war like today against global economic depression, that war was won. But the peace was lost. We didn't get high, inclusive growth. We didn't pay attention to our planet. We didn't pay attention to financial stability. We didn't pay attention to inequality as a global economy. And the result of this, we entered this crisis very weak because we never secured the peace. So when we look in front of us, we need to both win the war and secure the peace. It's not going to be easy. It is doable, but it's doable with leadership, visionary leadership. And this is particularly important in the advanced world, in the industrial countries. Why? Here is what we know already about the post-COVID-19 economy. 1, everyone will have more debt because in the short term, you're doing all you can in order to contain the damage, because the short-term priority is to stop short-term problems becoming long-term impediments. You don't want the people who lost their jobs in the short term to become long-term unemployment. You don't want a small business that simply has no sales, a restaurant that cannot open, an airline that cannot operate, to suddenly become bankrupt. So how do you do that? By borrowing. You borrow and you borrow and you borrow. So we're going to come out with every segment of society that has higher debt. And the debt levels in the advanced countries are going to start looking like the debt levels in the developing world. thing we're going to come out with, and Minister Amr Musa talked about it, is deglobalization. There's going to be two elements of this deglobalization. And unlike the previous two shocks to globalization in the last 10 years, it will involve companies and households. So if you remember, the shock to globalization in the last was about 2010, 2011, when you had a social backlash. When segments of society said in the advanced world, this is not working for us. They felt marginalized. They felt alienated. Why? Because they blamed China for losing jobs. They blamed companies for taking production to the developing countries. And the result of that was political anger. And the result of that was very unlikely outcomes. Brexit in the UK was due to political anger and a sense of we need to regain control from somebody else. The election of President Trump was also an element of political anger. And the rise of nationalism was another element throughout Europe. This third shock, the second shock, was the trade war between China and the US. This third shock has a geopolitical element on it. Already the United States and some European countries are blaming China. You did not tell us enough. You hid the facts from us. There's talk about China not living up to its responsibilities, its global responsibilities. And there's even talk in the US Congress of forcing China, although it's not going to happen in any way, of making payments to compensate for victims. As Minister Amr Musa mentioned, we are looking at renewed tensions between China and the United States. You cannot globalize the world when the two largest economies are fighting. The other reason why we're going to get deglobalization is company behavior. Companies have realized that their romance, the way they've embraced globalization, which means put production where it is cheapest, which means just-in-time inventory financing, all that is efficient, but it's not resilient. So we're going to see a swing in the pendulum from efficiency to resilience. People are going to localize supply chains. They're going to bring back supply chains. And going to come out in the West with something that's very familiar for many developing countries, which is an entanglement of the public sector with the private sector. And in the case, I can talk to the United States, it's going to look like a spaghetti bowl. It's going to look very messy because no principles are governing this entanglement. People are reacting to what they see, bailing out the airlines, the Federal Reserve flooding the system with trillions of dollars. It's a complete spaghetti bowl that will result in lower productivity. That lower productivity means lower growth, and it will mean, unfortunately, a greater inequality of income, wealth, and opportunity. So how do we navigate this? And by we, I mean countries in the developing world, I mean companies, I mean households. When I grew up, believe it or not, and I suspect 90% of the people on this call will not know what I'm talking about. But I didn't want to be either Ahlawi or Zamalkawi. I didn't understand why I had to be forced into that choice. I loved the color blue, and I became a Tirsanawi. And at that time, Tirsana was actually in the Premier League of Egypt. And what put Tirsana there is it had defense and offense. In offense, it had, of course, Mustafa Riyad, who to this day is the third leading scorer in Egyptian football, and El Shazli. They were amazing offense. In defense, They had Hassan Ali in goal, El-Estic, who somehow managed to do things that people didn't understand. And this defense and offense is the combination everybody needs today. For defense, I'm going to use the words resilience and optionality. And for offense, I'm going to use the word agility. The first thing about defense is don't score an own goal. Don't make things worse for yourself when you're already under pressure from somebody else. How can we make things worse for ourselves? One is denial. We simply refuse to understand that this is a generation-defining moment. It is. Secondly, what's known as adjustment fatigue. We get tired. We are taken out of our comfort zone. We don't like it. And we decide that we'll go back on our comfort zone on our own rules. But the world doesn't allow for our own rules. So we have to fight what's called adjustment fatigue. Thirdly, to think that there is precision. To think that we can accurately project what's ahead. No. You can talk about scenarios. And you have to have your minds open to scenarios. I got in a very unfortunate conversation on television at the beginning of this whole thing when I was shown revised growth rates for the United States that were specified with confidence to 1 decimal point. And I was asked to react. And I said, that's absurd. Let me take the example of a house. The exact decimal point suggests I know which apartment, in which building, in which street, in which city. I don't know what city we're going to be in because this is so unprecedented. Precision is impossible because this is a health emergency. We don't know about the rate of infection. We don't know about the rate of reinfection. We don't know about the vaccines. We don't know about the treatment. We simply don't know. And therefore, your mindset has to deal with scenarios and not precision. The next trap is never let the best be the enemy of the good. When you're dealing with crises, you have to make decisions quickly. You will never have full information. But be open to changing your mind as you get more information. That is really important at every level, companies, governments, and households. You have to be able to manage through a really difficult journey, and it's not going to be easy. And I wish I could say it's going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. I'll come back to how it actually looks in practice. And then there's the offense side, which is the emergence from the crisis management. You need agility. You need a realization you may have to do things differently. We may have to live with the virus. In fact, the reason why a W is likely is because we will end up living with the virus for a while. Everybody wants what's called community immunity, that all of us are immune to the disease. But vaccines are still a distance away. We will not get community immunity. So we will learn to live with the disease. And we need 2 things to know how to live with this disease. And it's not going to come easy. One is to reduce the damage it creates. Right now, if you get the coronavirus, the only answer is to give you time for your body to fight the virus. That is not a great proposition, especially if you're old like me and you have pre-existing conditions. We are going to have treatment, remedies that will help you fight it if you get it. And the second way, of course, of living with it is to have the ability to have the hospital beds, the ventilators, and what you need. We will start up again because we have an economic necessity to start up. Some places may have to close down again, but we will learn And the most positive thing is that every day we gain is a victory, because the scientists are working incredibly hard and we are having leapfrogging of scientific inventions. Once we have figured out how to live with the infection, we have to counter this slower global economy that we cannot change. We have to accept the fact that the global economy is not going to be a massive tailwind for us anymore. It will be a headwind. That is about investing in our people, starting with education, health, labor retooling, labor retraining, public-private partnerships, investing in our infrastructure, lowering the cost of doing business, investing in our institutions, and investing in our safety nets. If we do that, then some of the silver linings of this crisis, some of the good things of this crisis become a major tailwind, something that helps us along. As I said, we are leapfrogging in all sorts of exciting ways. Science, the balance between physical and virtual, the fact that we can hold this lecture today. As Dr. Tariq said at the beginning, it would have been unthinkable to do this 3 months ago. Now we're doing it almost out of routine. Think of the power that brings to Egypt in terms of access to knowledge, what it brings in terms of being able to educate people differently, turn the classroom upside down, rather than use the class for teachers giving out the information, then send people home to do their homework. Do it the other way around. Provide the information in a form that we can consume, and then use the classroom to work on problems, on solutions, on how to think, not what to think. I can tell you, my daughter, a few years ago, she's Samia, 16 years old. I went to her room a few years ago, and this is how she was doing her homework. And this is the average for someone in an American school. She was doing her homework on the computer. She had the iPad with Netflix on it at the same time. And she had her phone with FaceTime, a friend also doing her homework. You cannot possibly do your homework. And literally, I consume information differently than you do. Inta aguz, you don't understand. Judge me by my results. Our kids are able to learn differently, and we've now opened the way for them to learn differently. We have a lot more emphasis now on private sector responsibility to the community. What we are seeing in terms of private sector response, pharmaceuticals, technology, even finance, is being much more responsible towards the community. We are seeing much greater appreciation for what's called tail events. A tail event is a very small probability event that has devastating consequences. Pandemic is a tail event. The chances of its happening is very small, but when it happens, it is catastrophic. Well, you know what? We have another tail event that the developing countries are on the receiving end of. It's not actually a tail event anymore at all. It is a high probability event, climate change. Let's use this appreciation of tail events for climate change. Let's use the failure of global coordination to revamp a multilateral system. And then at the level of companies and people, let's understand better the importance of communication, of coaching, of caring. And let's talk openly about mental well-being. I'm dealing with students who are under enormous pressure. And it's important to understand it is not their fault, and we have to help them. I cannot but conclude that we are living in a very uncertain, unsettling time. It's uncertain not just because of the health issue, the economic issues, and the global system issues, all of which capture these three inconsistencies. But it's also difficult because of what they call behavioral science. We know how most of us react when we get taken out of our comfort zone. And when you're stuck at home, you can't go outside, you can't interact with your family, you are out of your comfort zone. The two defenses we have are not working. We can't deny our reality. That's one way of getting out of your comfort zone. You just deny it. Or the other way is you reframe it to something that you've experienced before. We've never experienced this. So we have to live with this uncertainty. But there's three ways of living with this uncertainty, and only one works. One is paralysis. You become paralyzed. You don't recognize this world, you don't know what to do, and you become paralyzed. That's the worst thing that can happen. The second way is what the behavioral scientists called active inertia. And let me use two examples to do this. Since I also have a US passport, I'm going to use the example of the US tourist that goes to a country and asks for something in English. And the person on the other end doesn't speak English. So they go like this. The most likely reaction of the American tourist is to realize they have to do something different. Their mind becomes active. It's not working. I have to do something different. And what is the most likely thing they will do different? They will say the same thing in English, but louder. That is called in business active inertia. You know you have to do something different, you end up doing the same. Professor Don Sull at the London Business School has written books on why the most successful companies fail when there's a paradigm change. These are very successful companies. Let's take the example of IBM. We all know IBM. IBM in the 1980s, early 80s, was the dominant brand in technology, the most profitable company in technology, and had massive research and development budgets. IBM identified the personal computer revolution. IBM knew that this was changing its paradigm because it was a mainframe company, and along comes the personal computer. IBM understood that the right response was to do less of what they were doing and do more of the tail events. What are the tail events? Enter the personal computer space to capture the clients that were going to go from the mainframe to the personal computer, and 10 times more clients coming from the outside. But in order to pay for this, take your mainframe upstream, provide premium services at premium prices. The perfect policy response. It was approved by management. It was approved by the board. A year later, IBM was almost bankrupt. So think about this. The best brand, the most money, very good brains, and the right strategy. Why? Because they couldn't convince their people to do something differently. The people ended up doing more of the same. So they starved the two and ended up doing more of what was no longer required. So be careful of active inertia, because that's the most likely problem we'll have at the government level, at the household level, and at the company level. You need a mindset that allows for scenarios, that embraces uncertainty, and that asks, and that's where I'm going to end, the most difficult question of all. And it's a question that we hate asking. In a world of unusual uncertainty, the chance of making a mistake goes up. No one wants to make a mistake. But when you are operating in unusual uncertainty, you may end up making a mistake. The question you need to ask yourself is, what is the difference between a mistake I can afford to make and a mistake I cannot afford to make? And understand that difference and think in that space for a while until you get more certainty as to what's ahead. And I have no doubt that Egypt in particular, with its people, its culture, and its network of families, will be able to manage that as long as we embrace the reality that we're facing and deal with resilience, optionality, and agility. Thank you, Dr. Tariq. This is